Deborah Miller didn't even wait for the champagne to settle before she disrupted the evening. She stood in the center of the Obsidian Peak Salon, projecting a polished, calculated hostility that made the atmosphere feel tense. I was reaching to fix a loose orchid in my sister Haley's hair when Deborah's hand moved suddenly. She didn't just touch my arm, she pulled the vintage gold pin from my hair, the one my mother had given me before she passed away. Before I could react, she dropped it into a half-full glass of champagne on a waiter's tray. With a faint, controlled smile, she told me that someone like me, a struggling, insignificant girl, had no right to wear family heirlooms in front of the Millers. She went further, saying I was a blemish on the legacy they were trying to establish with my sister. If I wanted to remain at the engagement, I needed to sign a legal waiver giving up any future claim to the Miller estate, or even my own family's limited assets. She labeled me as irrelevant, a freelancer with no financial standing or social influence, and implied that her son Justin deserved a partner whose family brought value instead of burden. Have you ever felt invisible within your own family? Like no matter what you achieve, people only recognize the version of you they've already decided on? Share your experience in the comments. I'd be interested to know how you handled it. I watched as the gold pin slowly sank through the champagne, settling at the bottom of the glass. My mother's pin. The only thing I had left that wasn't tied to work or numbers. Deborah's laughter cut through the soft jazz in the ballroom. She glanced between me and the waiver in her hand, clearly satisfied, as if she had finally put me in my place. I didn't react emotionally. I didn't reach into the glass. Instead, I felt a familiar stillness take over, the same clarity I experienced before a major business move. My thoughts sharpened, turning emotion into calculation. My anger wasn't visible. It became structured, precise. Deborah Miller had just made a move she couldn't recover from. I met her gaze, my expression calm and controlled. I understand, Deborah, I said evenly, my voice steady beneath the music. You want to ensure the Miller name stays protected from outsiders. She leaned closer, confident. Exactly. We have a reputation to maintain. This isn't a place for small-time freelancers from the suburbs. Sign the paper, then make yourself useful elsewhere. Perhaps the kitchen needs help. I took the pen from her. It was gold-plated, designed to impress, like everything else around her. I signed the document without reviewing it. To her, it was a clear win. To me, it marked a transition. This was no longer a personal issue. It was now a calculated move. What Deborah didn't realize was that 8 years ago, when I was working out of a dim basement fueled by determination, I wasn't just building a software company. I was creating Vance Capital. And Vance Capital doesn't simply handle finances. We control the systems that support environments like this. The Obsidian Peak, this display of inherited wealth and status, wasn't just a venue I selected for my sister's engagement. It was already part of my portfolio. I scanned the room, the formal attire, the legacy names, and briefly remembered who I used to be. Someone who believed she had to speak loudly to be heard. But experience had taught me otherwise. Real influence doesn't rely on volume. It operates through action. I stood there in a simple slate gray silk suit. No branding, no jewelry. I looked exactly like what they assumed, someone insignificant. I had chosen to stay understated so Haley could be the focus. She was talented, genuine, and unprepared for people like Deborah. I had promised not to overshadow her. But watching Deborah walk away, already recounting the moment to others with pride, I understood something had changed. Supporting Haley didn't mean staying silent. It meant removing the environment that threatened her. I moved toward the hallway, my steps quiet against the carpet. I wasn't leaving. I was repositioning. Passing a floor-to-ceiling mirror, I caught my reflection. I didn't look defeated. I looked focused. I entered the manager's office on the mezzanine level, a space defined by polished wood and tight security. The general manager, Marcus, who usually controlled the entire floor with ease, immediately lost composure when he saw me. He began to apologize, but I raised my hand. That was enough. I didn't need explanations. I needed results. I took out my phone and accessed the secure satellite line reserved for high-level operational decisions at Vance Capital. My tone was direct and measured as I spoke to my chief operations officer. Initiate Project Nightingale, Tier 1, effective immediately. There was a brief pause on the other end. Tier 1 meant full containment, complete operational shutdown for the target. The Miller family? She asked for confirmation. Every one of them, I replied. Restrict their internal corporate access. Suspend all discretionary spending connected to the Vance Hospitality Network. I then turned to Marcus, who was now standing rigidly. If any member of the Miller family attempts to charge anything tonight, drinks, dining, accommodations, flag it as fraudulent. He nodded quickly. Understood, Miss Vance. I returned to the balcony overlooking the ballroom, observing the scene below through the glass. It was a clear example of control and pressure within a family dynamic. Deborah had cornered Haley near the ice sculpture, holding her arm firmly. I could see Haley's posture shift, her shoulders tense, her head lowered. Deborah was likely reinforcing the same narrative, that Haley should feel fortunate to be accepted into their world. The first disruption began subtly. Justin, the groom-to-be, stood at the bar with a group of his fraternity friends, laughing as he ordered a round of expensive $200 scotch. He presented his black corporate card with confidence. The bartender swiped it, then tried again. A slight frown appeared on Justin's face. He said something irritated, likely blaming the machine. The bartender shook his head and returned the card. Justin quickly pulled out another, then a third. Each one failed. Every source of credit he believed he had access to was being cut off in real time. From where I stood, he looked less like a confident host and more like someone unable to understand what had just gone wrong. Nearby, his sister Brianna checked her phone. Her expression shifted instantly, from composed satisfaction to visible shock within seconds. I understood exactly what she was reading. An automated notice from the executive board of her company, a firm that Vance Capital had quietly acquired the previous quarter, informing her of an immediate administrative suspension pending an ethics review. Project Nightingale was advancing rapidly. This wasn't only about finances, it was about control. One by one, their access points were being removed. They had spent the entire evening highlighting their social standing, unaware that the very system supporting them was already being withdrawn. I felt a sense of calm. Many assume retaliation is driven by emotion, but in my case, it was structured, more like balancing accounts and ensuring everything aligned. Deborah Miller believed she could secure my silence and remove my presence with a document and a symbolic gesture. What she failed to understand was that the consequences extended far beyond that moment. I remained on the mezzanine, observing as each step of the process unfolded. A few minutes later, my lawyer, Eleanor, arrived. She blended seamlessly into the setting in a charcoal suit and handed me a leather folder marked with the Vance Capital seal. Her expression was composed but carried a clear sense of confirmation. "The report you requested," she said quietly. "It's more serious than we initially thought. The Miller family isn't financially stable. They're operating on borrowed structure." I opened the folder and reviewed the details. The numbers outlined the situation clearly. Justin Miller had been maintaining an image that wasn't supported by reality. To sustain the appearance of a high-level investor, he had leveraged nearly every family asset: the Lake Forest property, his father's retirement funds, even Deborah's jewelry, to secure high-interest loans. When those resources were exhausted, he escalated further. He borrowed $500 million from a private equity firm called Silver Shield, using all remaining assets as collateral, expecting a major IPO to recover his position. That IPO had already failed. What Justin didn't realize, and what none of them knew, was that Silver Shield had been acquired by me over a year ago. The obligations they were tied to weren't theoretical. They were binding agreements finalized under my authority. In that moment, it became clear that Justin wasn't just careless. He had been strategically positioning my sister Haley as part of his recovery plan. Despite his attitude toward me, he needed her connection to create the appearance of stability for his creditors. I looked down at Deborah, who was engaged in conversation with a senator's wife, confidently displaying a 3-carat diamond ring. That ring, like many other things in that room, was no longer truly hers. Everything around them, the event, the service, the environment, was operating within systems I controlled, and the balance had not been settled. "The demand notice?" I asked Eleanor. "Delivered to his personal device 3 minutes ago," she replied. We've also activated the clawback provisions on their hospitality accounts. As of now, they are officially in default. There was a precise clarity in that moment. In business terms, this would be considered a liquidation event. In personal terms, it was simply the exposure of truth. For years, I had allowed them to define me as the lesser sibling, the one with a modest lifestyle and limited visibility. I had allowed that perception to continue, offering patience where it wasn't returned. Now that margin was gone. I watched as Justin checked his phone again. This time, his expression had changed completely. The confusion was replaced with something much more direct: realization. His eyes moved quickly around the room, searching for answers. He leaned toward Brianna and whispered something. Her face had already turned pale. This wasn't just about losing access to funds or professional standing. They were watching their entire structure collapse. Every assumption they had built about their position was being undone through a series of formal notices and legal actions. "Should we wait for the cake cutting?" Eleanor asked quietly, a faint, controlled smile on her face. "No," I replied, adjusting my mother's gold pin, now returned to me by Marcus, polished and restored. "It's time I step forward. I want Deborah to understand exactly who she has been dealing with." I began walking down the grand staircase. My pace was steady and deliberate. There was no urgency. When you control the environment, timing is entirely your decision. I moved through the room in my slate gray suit, standing out against the elaborate setting without needing to draw attention. Eleanor followed closely behind, carrying the leather folder. We reached the center of the ballroom just as Deborah was addressing a group of potential donors, speaking with full confidence. She noticed me approaching and made no effort to hide her reaction. Turning to her group, she gestured toward me. "Everyone, look, the sister has returned," she said. "Did you finish in the kitchen, Maya? Or are you here to ask for help?" A few people around her reacted with quiet amusement. Justin and Brianna quickly stepped in, their composure strained. Justin reached for my shoulder. "Maya, not now," he said. "We're dealing with a temporary issue. Just go home. I'll speak with you tomorrow." I looked at his hand until he withdrew it. My attention shifted back to Deborah. "The tasks are complete," I said calmly. "Now it's time we address the outstanding balance." "The balance?" Deborah replied dismissively. "I don't discuss financial matters with freelancers. I speak to management." "Exactly," I said, my tone steady and professional. "And I represent management." I nodded to Eleanor. She stepped forward and opened the folder. "Justin Miller," she began clearly, her voice carrying across the immediate area. "At 5:42 p.m. today, Silver Shield Holdings initiated foreclosure proceedings on all collateral linked to your $500 million loan. This includes your primary residence, family financial accounts, and declared personal assets, including jewelry. These have now been seized." The room fell silent. Deborah's hand trembled slightly as she held her glass. "Silver Shield? What are you saying?" she demanded. "Justin, explain this." Justin didn't respond. His expression reflected complete realization. "That's only part of it," I continued, stepping slightly closer. "Given your concerns about reputation, I reviewed your corporate records. Brianna, your public relations firm has not only been consulting, you've been transferring $600,000 per month into a private account. That qualifies as financial misconduct." Eleanor continued, "As of last Tuesday, your firm came under the ownership of Vance Capital. Those transactions now constitute internal violations." Brianna reacted immediately, unable to maintain composure. Around us, attention shifted. Conversation stopped, and several guests began observing more closely. "You're making this up," Deborah said sharply, her tone losing composure. "You have no authority. You're only Haley's sister." I responded in a clear, measured voice, audible across the room. "No, Deborah. I am the owner of the Obsidian Peak. I am the holder of your son's financial obligations, and I am the one who has revoked your access to the networks you rely on." I then turned slightly toward Marcus, who was standing nearby, waiting for instruction. "Marcus," I said, addressing the security team, "please escort the Miller family to the service exit. Since they no longer have access to the ballroom, the alternative route will be more appropriate for their current situation." Deborah moved forward in anger, but the guards intervened immediately. Her composure broke as she raised her voice, no longer able to maintain control. Justin had already collapsed into a chair, his head lowered, while Brianna was guided away, visibly shaken. At that moment, Haley stepped out from the crowd and approached Justin. He looked up at her, clearly seeking support. "Haley, please," he said, "tell her to stop this. We're about to be married." Haley looked at him, then at the ring on her hand, the same ring that had been funded through questionable means. Without hesitation, she removed it and placed it into the same glass of champagne where Deborah had thrown my mother's pin. "My sister is my family, Justin," Haley said, her voice steady and clear. "And you are no longer part of that equation." We turned and walked away, leaving the situation behind us. The doors of the Obsidian Peak ballroom closed, cutting off the noise from inside. The hallway was quiet, cool, and composed, carrying a sense of finality. We didn't look back. There was no reason to. Once a decision like that is executed, there's nothing left to review. Outside, the cold Chicago air felt sharp and refreshing. Haley paused and took a deep breath. Her eyes were still moist, but her expression had changed, more certain, more resolved. She looked at her hand, now free of the ring, and let out a quiet, relieved laugh. "That was the most precise and expensive corporate takedown I've ever seen," she said, leaning slightly against the waiting SUV. Then she looked at me with a genuine smile. "I think I owe you a lifetime of my artwork, Maya, and maybe a very large cheeseburger." I smiled and pulled her into a hug, something simple and familiar, like when we were younger and planning our future without limits. "You don't owe me anything," I told her. "You're my sister, and no one, especially not a family that confuses status with character, has the right to diminish your value." As the SUV pulled away, I glanced back at the Obsidian Peak building. By the next day, the situation would become public. The Miller name would lose its standing across business circles internationally. There might be a short-term drop in the hotel's valuation due to leadership disruption, but that was temporary. The underlying issue had already been addressed. I looked at the gold chain on my wrist, the same one that had survived everything. Some forms of value don't require visibility. They don't depend on external approval or display. Real influence is quiet. It's the ability to understand a situation fully and decide the right moment to act. That night, for the first time in years, I didn't check updates or review data. Instead, I sat with my sister in our old apartment, sharing a simple meal and talking about what comes next. A future defined not by expectations or transactions, but by choice. The matter was resolved. The balance was restored.